Hey, this is Ben. I wanted to go through a recreation of some of the Tunic sounds that I've done. This is a sequence from right at the start of the game that I recorded with the music turned off. My goal was to replace their sound effects with my own, but sort of like trying to keep it as close to the reference as I could, but also, make it sound reasonable because you can't get the exact same sounds. So first off, I'm just going to go through the original audio and video that I recorded. All right, it's pretty long. And here is my version of it. All right, first up, the sound when the slime notices you. This is their version. And here's mine. So the timbre is obviously different, but I think the intent is very similar and it still sounds good as a sound effect. It's all done in Phase Plant, a synthesizer, which can play samples tuned to the keyboard. So that's me playing with the keyboard. It's got a super short envelope, and the sample itself comes from their built-in ones. All right, the next is the sound of the slime jumping. Here is theirs, and here is mine. I actually put the samples further back in the video because I think it synced better. It's probably just some like implementation detail of how it was done in Tunic that makes it feel a bit off to me, but anyway, this looks better on the video. I also played two of them unlike the original. But anyway, here we go. This is just a single sample that I recorded of a giant acrylic sheet that I had. It was the covering for a picture frame wobbling in front of a microphone. Here's the actual sample itself. Which, when I chop it up and equalize it, I think I also sped it up a lot, sped up the sample a lot. Yeah, it's playing it to over twice as fast, and equalized to cut out a lot of the lows. Sounds like it was a lot better. Not like super similar to what they had, but I think it sounds like a slime jumping, so I'm happy with it. All right, next is you attacking the slime. Here is their version, and here is mine. It feels like you're hitting a slime, so I'm happy with it. So I'll go through the layers here. Firstly, the swing, which is a sample from the GDC samples that the first thing I actually did was to take out this. There was kind of a tonality here that I didn't like, so I removed it. And then I pitched the whole thing down. The other thing that's harder to see is that there's a delay and reverb that I've added as sends down here. I did this to a bunch of sounds. I'll just show you the send configuration. Here's the reverb. So a fairly short delay, decay, and delay 100 is just a slapback single 100 millisecond delay. Overall, you get this. Next up, the body of the whole thing is the crunch, which, as you can probably hear, is essentially white noise, which is done in Phase Plant with a couple of different white noise generators. There's this one, which is a lower one, and then a high transient. You can see the envelope for the high version is much shorter than the low version. There's also quite a lot of plugins here, which I'll enable one at a time. That's just the white noise. Doesn't sound very good. I added some transient to it and distortion to raise the volume. And these filters give it a bit of movement. And I also added the little radiator onto this to give it some bit more distortion, I guess. You can definitely hear it, and it definitely sounds better. All right, next up is the kick drum. Pretty simple. Not going to go through this too much. It adds a transient and an EQ to take out the highs, and the same thing with the little radiator instead of distortion. So if you play these three sounds as the body of the hit, then I've added that same acrylic sheet sample, but played a bit, like kind of chopped up a bit differently, which makes it sound like you're hitting a slime rather than a tree. And the final layer is this sort of barking sound, but like I guess a pan pipe or something, barking sound. This is because there's some tonality in the original hit, which you can hear. And without this barking sound, it doesn't really have it. And here. So in a way that layers are, I think you could definitely feel the difference, but it's subtle. This is done as these two notes played again in phase plant, which uses a very similar approach as before, where it's the sample generator. So overall, you get this. The thing is that this attack sound is actually played 3 times. The first time is what I showed you. The second time includes this extra little layer that I think is saying the slime's about to die, and the third time is the slime actually dying. And here was my version of it. The extra layer for the second hit, I've called it a pahoo, but it is kind of this like very stereotypical, I guess you'd say, critical hit sound. But it's a big difference, which is done in phase plant. It's just some white noise with this LFO, this wavy LFO. And then the kill sound is quite different. It is the same as the hit sound, but without that you hit a slime extra layer, and it adds this explosion layer and what I've called a little blat layer. Kind of a cool little tonal accent that matches the little cloud that comes out. The explosion layer is me shaking a garbage bag in front of my microphone. This is what it sounds like as an explosion. This is what it sounds like as a garbage bag. Big pitch shift change. And then this EQ to just like remove a lot of the highs and boost the lows. Sounding pretty close to the actual sound at this point. Then I added decapitator, which is the main thing that gives it the real beefy, distorted sound. And lastly, this delay here, similar to a slapback, but a bit longer, lengthens the explosion kind of, but without adding a reverb. And the second layer to this is the little blat thing, which is like really cute. I really like it. Again, exactly the same. There's a sample from their examples, and the notes that play are these, which I was, I slowed down the original again. And they also added this EQ here, which, as you can see, it removes a lot of the bottom. And there was this little clicking sound that I didn't like, so I removed that. But overall, we have, I think it sounds great. Next is this little sequence of the gem bouncing and then being picked up. So here's the original. And here is my version. The gem bouncing sound is pretty cute. It's in the synth, it's a square wave with a bit of the highs taken off here, and with the pulse width changed. So here it is. But if I take off the pulse width, you can hear, you know, it sounds kind of boring. But this way it sounds a bit brighter, a bit more hollow. It sounds like a bouncing gem to me. And the gem pickup sound is, again, uses phase plant with white noise. So yeah, overall you get, which I'm actually super happy with. All right, next up is trying to open the door and finding that it's locked. So here's their version. And here's mine. That's very, very similar. I'm happy with that. Just 3 layers here. Firstly, we've got a sound of a door closing. That's from the GDC sample. Repeated twice, and the second time much softer. Mainly here, I took off the transient and added this EQ here. So then there's the same thing as the same kick, I think, as for the attack. And the sound of a door locking, again from GDC. You can see here the rate is slightly higher than for the second part, and that's to actually just change the pitch of it. And here I removed the transient, tiny bit of it, I guess, and took off a lot of the bass, the low end. And overall. All right, next, the sound of your little fox rolling. That's the original, and here's mine. I mean, it's virtually indistinguishable, really. You know, we use different whoosh samples, but besides that, not that much difference. There's actually 2 layers here. One is that whooshing sound, which is a GDC sample that's sped up a little bit to raise the pitch. And then this really actually very subtle low-end kick from the analog samples, just to give it a bit of body to it, so you can see the difference here. It feels different, I don't know, at least with headphones. All right, next up is the sound of you picking up the key. So yeah, actually, this took a fair amount of time to do. Here's my version. So I break this up into 3 parts. Firstly, the opening of the dialogue. Secondly, when you move to select that second button. And thirdly, when you actually say OK, and it plays the long key get sound. The open dialogue. These are 2 phase plant patches. Firstly, for that kind of droplet sound, which is done as like a sine wave with a little droplet kind of envelope here for the volume, and this pitch envelope. And the second part is the more complicated flavoursome part of it, which is a couple of plugins and primarily phase plant. One of the sample generators with this envelope here. If I take off all the effects, you get, and I've sent this is send for just playing it down the octave at the same time. Give some body to it. And using Echo Boy as the delay. I use Echo Boy because it sounds awesome. And yeah, that's essentially why. You know, I tried it with a normal delay and it sounded like a delay, and I used Echo Boy and it sounds, it's like really colorful and interesting. So overall, the second part is the select button. Here's the original. This is like phase plant again with the sample generator. And finally, the fun part, which is closing the dialogue and getting the key. That's the original, and mine is. So we'll go into the layers here. This top one is the actual kind of the dialogue sound. Very similar to the dialogue open sound. In fact, I think it's. Then the first whoosh, which is a whoosh that took me the longest to get because I'm a perfectionist. So I really spent a long time tuning the LFO and tuning the envelope to get. The other thing I added was crystallizer here. That's without crystallizer. That's with it. It's like super subtle, but I'll play it another couple of times. Without. Just with it. It kind of adds texture, which I really like. And I don't think the original has anything like this, really. The original has a different texture, which I was having a hard time recreating. The next part is super fun. So this uses faceplant with noise. A couple of filters here. Firstly, this one which controls the pitch of the whoosh based on the actual note that gets played. That's what this modulator here is. And this second filter is not really, it just cuts out the low end. Yeah, so it's kind of gross. And then, as you can see, I added decapitator to it, which is what gives it that nice distorted body to it. Next up is this takeoff sound, which is a lot of fun. So again, it's pretty. Faceplant uses 2 white noise generators and this LFO. Anyway, but this is the higher part of the takeoff sound, and here's the lower part. When you add the higher part, you can obviously hear more, but when you add the lower part, it's got this kind of like detuned almost sound to it. And then lastly, I added a little radiator to it. So again, it just gives a bit more body. So here's without it and with it. Next up is this little laser pew sound. It's super cool. Sounds like a space weapon. Oh, it's just a sine wave with a envelope and this LFO, which makes it, that's what, 5 octave. And lastly, this kind of extra body from a kick drum, the same kick as before. Pretty subtle, but you'll hear it when I play them one at a time. And I add this the long whoosh. These heavy whooshes, the sound of the key spinning. The takeoff sound, which matches that little banner that shows up. Then the laser pew, which makes a huge difference. And this kick. And finally, the most complicated sound is opening the door and using the key. Here's the full sequence, the original. And here is mine. I think that sounds awesome. Again, this is broken up into 2 sections this time. Firstly, the dialogue, down as same as before, and then the fun part, which is this sequence here. All right, so start with this like funky little tune. This, you would be unsurprised that this took me a really long time, and I'm not totally sure that it was time well spent. But anyway, you know, when you compare it to the original, it's different, but my God, it's similar. The same kind of deal as with the other faceplant pitched kind of notes. There's a sine wave here with this LFO to just like slightly pitch shift it. You know, if I take it off, you know, it's like detuned and it, yeah, definitely sounds better than a couple of little plugins. The decapitator, you can see how different that is. You know, I mean, this plugin sounds awesome. Oh, and there's some reverb that was added as a send, so. All right, next up is the body here of the door actually being unlocked and opened. So if I do that, yeah, there's a lot to this, and it took me a long time. But you could kind of break it up sequentially, more or less, into the swinging of the key here, then inserting the key here, then turning the key and the latch opening with sparkles, and finally the door opening here. Very kind of Zelda sound or something. All right, let's go over it one at a time. This like whoosh is the same whoosh that I used for swinging of the stick. Played twice, once, if I zoom in, once at a lower pitch and secondly at a higher pitch, you know, by changing the playback rate. Then for inserting the key, firstly, it's the same door knock sound for the locked door there. I think I literally copied the track. And again, this time there's this extra snare drum body to it. There's literally nothing done here to this other than modifying the playback rate slightly. Okay, and then these kind of cool little synthy sounds. Put that back. And yeah, for the synthy sounds, use faceplant. The chew sound is white noise with a LFO filter. The pew sound is the bassiness to it. I think this again. I think I'm very similar to the patch earlier for the getting of the key, and this whoop sound here at the end. Very similar to the pew, but in reverse. Which when you play them together, yeah, it's kind of a cartoony accompaniment to the more sample, literal sound of opening the door, which I think is like, yeah, it's super nice. And yeah, for the sound of the key turning, that part, the body, I guess, is this sound here, which is, I'll just play it in isolation. This is from GDC. Which when you chop it up, it's, semi-unrecognizable. It's sped up to increase the pitch, and that is it, really. There's no plugins at all, other than the delay send. And that is layered with this chain metal thingy, which is just a high-end sparkle to the whole thing. So I guess I'll open the original. Super quiet, low in the mix, aggressively removing the lows. So, it makes it more sparkly. Now for some like literal sparkles. That sounds super cool. However, the sparkles actually took me like a really long time to get right, because I've never done sparkles before in sound design. And it's like one of those things which you sort of hear everywhere, and I had no idea how to do. So I don't know how they did it. I'm super curious. I don't know how other people do them, but the way I did them is this triangle wave. They're played quite high up on the keyboard. You know, I take off the delay. Very pretty. You know, fairly short attack and longer delay, but really filtering out all the lows. So this sounds gross. I guess not that gross. Anyway, more sparkly when you take off all that low end. The secret part of this is using Echo Boy. If I take it off, doesn't really sound sparkly, but now. Then I chose these 3 notes here to sort of fit in best with the tonality of the other, you know, these tube sounds. Yeah, sounds nice. Oh yeah, and that's the lock turning. That, I think it's very little, yeah, not even changed. There was just a really nice sample from the GDC samples of a hotel room unlocking. And lastly, the sound of the door opening, which took me forever to get right, believe it or not, because here is that by itself, and here is the original, which I was trying to match. You know, it's different, but the kind of the funky part of it is that this is quite a tonal white noise sound. I mean, it's white noise, but it's quite tonal. You know, it's not just the sound of, you know, faceplant noise generator. So to get this, I went into the GDC pack and, you know, found this sound here. The thing is that it's automated, so to rise in pitch. Because if I take off the automation, it does sound like white noise. So overall, the sound of the door opening is pretty awesome, if you ask me. So yeah, that's it. I play the whole thing through one more time and then fade to black.